The second I heard tires crunching where no tires should be, I knew it was her. I dropped my wrench, wiped my hands on my jeans, and stormed out of my garage just in time to see a silver Lexus rolling right across my front lawn. Again. "Hey, Teresa!" I shouted, waving my arms. "Get off my grass." Teresa Collins, president of the Willow Creek HOA and full-time menace, cranked down her window just enough to shout back, "I'm performing an inspection, Patrick. Your lawn looks a little patchy." She gave me this fake little laugh, like she hadn't just ripped a muddy rut through my yard. "I don't remember giving you permission to drive on private property," I yelled. "You agreed to HOA jurisdiction when you bought here," she said, flipping her sunglasses down like she was some kind of celebrity. "Besides, it's for community standards." I clenched my jaw so hard I thought I might crack a tooth. This was the third time this month she'd pulled this stunt. First, it was checking for weeds, then measuring fence height. Always some excuse. Always her tires carving new scars into my grass. And every time I complained, a fresh letter from the HOA about some imaginary violation. That night, after pacing my living room like a caged animal, I decided I was done playing nice. The next morning, I hit up a buddy of mine who owns a hardware store. By noon, I had exactly what I needed, a set of heavy-duty portable spike strips. Legal to own. Totally illegal to drive over if you're trespassing. I buried them just under the surface of the grass where Teresa loved to roll through, carefully marking the spot with a rock only I would recognize. I even set up my security cameras to get the perfect angle. If she wanted to inspect my lawn so badly, she was about to get a real close look. The next few days, I kept my cool. No sudden moves. No angry letters or confrontations. Just the slow, patient hum of preparation. I mowed the lawn carefully around the hidden spike strips, keeping the grass trim but never exposing anything. Meanwhile, I adjusted the cameras to make sure I'd catch every second in crystal clear detail. On Thursday afternoon, as I was tuning up my old motorcycle in the garage, I heard that familiar purr. Teresa's Lexus rounding the corner with the same arrogance as always. I wiped my hands on a fresh rag and leaned against the workbench, pretending not to notice. The second her front tires hit the grass, there was a sharp, metallic hiss followed by a heavy, wet thumping sound. Her car lurched forward a few feet before sagging to a pitiful halt, both front tires completely deflated. For a moment, there was only stunned silence except for the faint whine of the engine idling. Then Teresa screeched loud enough for the entire block to hear. "What the hell?" she bellowed, throwing open her door and staggering out in her ridiculous high heels, sinking into the soft dirt. I walked out slowly, wiping the grease from my hands, and stopped at the edge of my driveway. "Problem, Teresa? You sabotaged my car," she shrieked, pointing at the ground where the strip of spikes sat like a set of gleaming teeth. "You drove onto private property without permission," I said calmly. Again, cameras caught everything. Her face turned a shade of red I'd never seen outside of cartoon characters. "This is HOA business. I was inspecting community compliance." "Funny," I said, pulling my phone from my pocket and tapping the screen. The video played clearly, her Lexus rolling off the street, bouncing over the curb and driving in a straight line across my lawn. No clipboard. No inspection gear. Just her acting like she owned the place. "This is entrapment," she sputtered, storming toward me. "Actually," I said, stepping back onto my driveway, "it's called protecting my property." "You're not above the law, Teresa." She yanked out her own phone and began furiously dialing. Within minutes, her husband, Jeff, rolled up in his pickup truck, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. He gave me a sheepish nod before jogging over to his wife. Their argument was loud enough that a few neighbors wandered out to watch from their porches. "This is harassment," Teresa shouted at Jeff, waving toward me like I was some kind of infestation. "He's setting traps." "Traps." Jeff muttered something I couldn't hear, then reluctantly turned to me. "Patrick, maybe we can handle this without escalation." "Sure," I said, crossing my arms. "As soon as Teresa pays for the damage to my lawn. Again. And apologizes. Publicly." Jeff looked like he was going to be sick. Teresa looked like she wanted to claw my eyes out. Instead, she stomped back to her car and sat there fuming while Jeff changed her tires. But the real fireworks started 2 days later. I got a letter not from the HOA, but from the city. Apparently, Teresa had filed a complaint accusing me of setting dangerous traps in a common area, claiming it endangered community safety. She even attached a doctored photo showing the spike strip placed in the middle of the sidewalk. Problem was, I had timestamps, footage, and the original unedited photos. I marched straight down to the city office with a flash drive loaded with evidence and demanded a hearing. At the hearing, Teresa showed up in a fire engine red suit, acting like she was the queen of the world. She ranted about community values and dangerous individuals undermining neighborhood harmony. It was almost impressive how much nonsense she could fit into a single breath. When it was my turn, I plugged in the flash drive and played the video. Silence fell over the room as everyone watched Teresa's car jump the curb, drive across my lawn, and shred her tires on my property nowhere near any common area. Then I showed the doctored photo she had submitted compared to the original footage. A city official leaned in, frowning. "Mrs. Collins, can you explain why your submitted evidence does not match the timestamped video?" Teresa's mouth flapped open and shut like a fish. She stammered something about camera glitches and technical errors, but it was clear the room wasn't buying it. The city official cleared his throat. "Given the evidence, we're dismissing the complaint against Mr. Dwyer. Furthermore, Mrs. Collins, filing falsified evidence is a serious offense. We will be forwarding this matter to the city attorney for review." You could have heard a pin drop. Teresa's face drained of color. She tried to protest, but the official cut her off with a curt, "You may leave." I walked out of that office with a copy of the dismissal and a city order confirming that my property was private and not subject to HOA inspections without explicit permission. I framed that paper and hung it in my garage like a trophy. But it didn't end there. Later that week, a few neighbors, ones who had kept their heads down until now, started knocking on my door. Turns out, Teresa had been pulling similar stunts with them. Fines for imaginary weeds, threats over mailbox colors, even trespassing into backyards claiming fence measurements. One neighbor, Mrs. Alvarez, showed me a bill Teresa had issued demanding $200 for non-compliant garden gnomes. Another, Mr. Patel, had actual photos of Teresa uprooting his rose bushes because they were too vibrant and disrupting community aesthetics. We formed a committee that night, not under the HOA, outside of it. We called it the Willow Creek Homeowners for Accountability. Catchy, right? Together, we dug into the HOA's finances. What we found made my blood boil. Misappropriated funds, undisclosed bonuses to board members, mostly Teresa and her cronies, and a slew of shady invoices that smelled like kickbacks. We compiled everything into a neat little dossier and handed it over to the county district attorney's office. They were very interested. A month later, an unmarked car rolled up to Teresa's house. 2 plainclothes officers knocked on her door. She answered, smug as ever, until she saw the badges. Her expression collapsed like a house of cards. She was charged with multiple counts of fraud, trespassing, evidence tampering, and misuse of community funds. The court hearings dragged on for months, but by the end, the HOA was dissolved by court order. As for Teresa, she pleaded out to avoid jail time but was slapped with massive fines, community service, and a 5-year ban from participating in any homeowners association leadership. The neighborhood threw a block party when the news broke. Someone even brought a cake shaped like a lawn, complete with tiny tire tracks and little fondant spike strips. Standing there, a cold drink in my hand, surrounded by neighbors who had once been too afraid to speak up, I realized something. Bullies only win when good people stay quiet, and sometimes all it takes to bring down a tyrant is a few sharp points and a whole lot of patience. The block party buzzed late into the night, laughter and music stitching together a neighborhood that had finally shaken off its leash. But even as the last of the folding chairs were packed away and the cooler lids snapped shut, I knew it wasn't over. Not yet. The next morning, I found an envelope taped to my front door. No return address, just my name scrawled in tight, angry letters. I peeled it off and opened it right there on the porch. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a fake notice of lien against my property, claiming I owed thousands in back dues to the now-defunct HOA. It was signed with a flourish by a reinstated board authority, a name I didn't recognize. I walked straight to my home office, fired up my computer, and cross-checked the signature. No surprise, it belonged to one of Teresa's old cronies, a guy named Victor Hale. He had vanished after the HOA dissolution, but apparently he had crawled back out of whatever hole he was hiding in. I wasn't about to let it slide. I called my friend Jenna, a real estate attorney who had quietly helped us during the committee meetings. She showed up an hour later with a crisp folder of paperwork and a look on her face that said she was ready to go to war. First, she said, flipping through the papers, this lien is completely fraudulent. There's no legal standing since the HOA was dissolved by court order. Filing a fake lien is mortgage fraud under state law. Second, whoever sent this is in serious trouble. I leaned against the counter, arms crossed. How serious? Felony serious, Jenna said. If we play this right, we can nail them to the wall. We decided on a plan: gather evidence, catch them trying to enforce the fake lien, and hand everything over to the authorities. Simple. Clean. Devastating. 2 days later, a man showed up at my door wearing a cheap suit and holding a clipboard. He introduced himself as an enforcement agent for the Willow Creek Revival Committee. I could barely keep a straight face. "You're trespassing," I said, stepping out onto my porch. He cleared his throat. "Sir, failure to pay your outstanding dues will result in foreclosure proceedings." "Fascinating," I said, pulling out my phone and hitting record. "Tell me more about these proceedings." The guy hesitated but pressed on, reading from a wrinkled script. "Due to non-compliance with community regulations, and by authority of the Willow Creek Revival Committee, your property is subject to lien and seizure unless payment is received within 30 days. "And who exactly authorized this committee?" I asked. He shifted uncomfortably. The interim board. Interim board dissolved by court order 6 weeks ago," I said. "You're attempting to collect a fraudulent debt on private property. That's a crime." The man's face turned pale. I pointed to the security camera perched above the door. "You're being recorded. Unless you want to explain this to a judge, I suggest you leave." He didn't need telling twice. He stuffed his clipboard under his arm and practically sprinted back to his battered sedan. Jenna filed a formal complaint with the county clerk's office that afternoon. We also reported the incident to the state attorney general's office. Apparently, we weren't the only ones. Turns out Victor and a few others were sending fake liens to multiple residents, trying to scare them into paying back dues. The hammer fell hard. Warrants were issued for Victor Hale and 2 other former board members. Police raided Victor's rental house across town and found boxes of fake paperwork, forged signatures, and even a binder labeled "New Rules" that detailed plans to re-establish control through intimidation. The county prosecutor announced charges: multiple counts of mortgage fraud, forgery, conspiracy to commit fraud, and racketeering. Victor was arrested in his front yard while mowing the grass, still wearing his headphones, totally oblivious until the officers surrounded him. His confused yelp echoed down the street, and more than a few neighbors peeked out their windows to watch him get cuffed and stuffed into the back of a cruiser. At a press conference, the district attorney called it one of the most brazen attempts at organized homeowner exploitation we've ever seen. She thanked the Willow Creek residents for their vigilance and cooperation. It felt good to be recognized, but even better was seeing the fear finally evaporate from the neighborhood. People planted new gardens without asking permission. Kids chalked up the sidewalks with wild, colorful drawings. Porch lights twinkled deep into the night. One evening, as I was tightening the chain on my bike in the garage, Mr. Patel wandered over with a couple of beers. He handed me one and leaned against the workbench. "You know," he said, twisting the cap off, "I don't think any of us realized how scared we were until we weren't anymore." I nodded. Tyrants thrive on silence. He clinked his bottle against mine. "Not anymore." We sat there for a while, talking about plans for a real community association, one that would be voluntary, transparent, and focused on actually helping people instead of controlling them. No fines. No forced inspections. Just neighbors looking out for each other. Meanwhile, Teresa had gone radio silent. I heard through the grapevine she had moved in with her sister 2 towns over, trying to lay low while she dealt with the civil suits stacking up against her. Apparently, several residents had filed for damages related to her unlawful fines and trespassing incidents. Word was she might lose what little retirement savings she had left. No one here shed a tear. One Saturday, a few of us gathered to finally reseed the bare patches in my front yard, the ones Teresa had mangled with her Lexus. We turned it into a block event. Music playing, kids running around with watering cans, neighbors swapping gardening tips. As I raked fresh soil over the new seed, Jenna wandered over, hands in her pockets. "Think they'll ever try something like this again?" she asked. "If they do," I said, tossing a handful of grass seed. "This time the whole neighborhood's ready." She laughed, a real, genuine sound, and helped me spread mulch around the edges. Later, as the sun dipped low and the sky painted itself in purples and golds, I stood at the edge of my driveway and looked out across Willow Creek. For the first time since I'd moved here, it actually felt like home. Not the kind of home ruled by fear and power trips. The kind built by stubborn, decent people who decided enough was enough. And as the porch lights blinked on, one by one, across the street, I knew we weren't just neighbors anymore. We were a community. Summer settled into Willow Creek with the heavy warmth of late June, and for the first time in years, the streets felt like they belonged to the people who lived there, not the ones who tried to control them. Kids zipped by on bikes, front porches buzzed with laughter, and the only thing anyone worried about was whether there would be enough burgers at the next weekend cookout. Still, there was unfinished business. Victor Hale's arrest had sent a strong message, but the deeper investigation into the collapsed HOA unearthed something far worse than we had anticipated. During the discovery phase of the court proceedings, prosecutors found proof that the old board had been running an illegal slush fund, siphoning thousands of dollars yearly from fabricated fines and maintenance fees into private accounts. Money that had been meant for community upkeep had been funneled into personal vacations, luxury cars, and even a down payment on a lakeside property 2 counties over. The district attorney's office didn't waste a second. Subpoenas went flying. Bank records were seized. Depositions were scheduled. One by one, former board members were dragged into court under charges that carried real prison time, not just fines or community service. I knew it was serious when federal agents, not just local police, started showing up at hearings. Jenna called a meeting of our committee one evening at Mrs. Alvarez's place. We gathered around her kitchen table, faces lit by the warm glow of an overhead lamp, tension thick in the air. The U.S. Attorney's Office is opening an investigation into wire fraud and tax evasion, Jenna said, flipping open a folder stuffed with documents. They believe Teresa and Victor filed false tax documents to hide the embezzled funds. Mr. Patel leaned forward, his knuckles whitening against the table edge. "What does that mean for us?" "It means," Jenna said, her voice steady, "they're going to prison. Real prison. And we have the right to sue for damages in civil court." No one spoke for a moment, not out of fear, but out of sheer amazement that justice was not just an idea, it was happening. Cleared my throat. We need to follow through, not just for us, but so nobody ever thinks about pulling this crap again. Everyone nodded. Over the next few weeks, Jenna helped file a class action lawsuit on behalf of the residents who had been wrongfully fined, harassed, and defrauded. Depositions were brutal. Teresa tried to wriggle out of responsibility, claiming she had been misled by Victor and pressured by other board members. It didn't work. The paper trail was too strong, the testimonies too damning. The final blow came when a former treasurer, a quiet man named Leonard who had quit the HOA 18 months earlier, agreed to testify. He brought journals documenting every shady transaction and secret meeting. Apparently, Leonard had grown disgusted but had been too scared to speak up until now. In court, Leonard's testimony painted a vivid picture of Teresa's reign, how she had orchestrated fake violations to justify fines, how she had pocketed cash payments from terrified residents, and how she had used HOA funds like her personal piggy bank. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. Guilty on all counts. The judge didn't hold back. Teresa was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole for wire fraud, conspiracy, and financial misconduct. Victor received 10 years due to his additional attempts to reestablish the fraudulent liens. 2 other board members received lesser sentences but were ordered to pay hefty restitution. As part of the settlement, Teresa's personal assets were seized to repay the residents of Willow Creek. Her gleaming Lexus, the one that had torn up my lawn and sparked this whole war, was auctioned off. The proceeds funded a community improvement grant that the city matched dollar for dollar. We used it to rebuild. The cracked sidewalks got repaved. The park that had been neglected for years was cleaned up with new playground equipment and fresh benches. Streetlights were repaired and a mural celebrating community resilience was painted on the once dingy wall that faced Main Street. One Saturday afternoon, as I helped install new flower beds around the park entrance, Mrs. Alvarez approached with a small cardboard box. "I thought you should have this," she said, handing it over. Inside was a chunk of Teresa's old HOA office sign, cracked clean down the middle. Someone had found it abandoned in the storage unit the court had cleared out. I laughed, a deep, cathartic sound that echoed across the lawn. "I think we should hang it in the park," I said. "As a reminder." Mr. Patel chimed in as he worked a shovel into the earth nearby. "Remind us of what?" "That no one owns this place but us," I said. "And no one ever will again." We mounted the broken sign inside a shadow box on a new community bulletin board, right next to a plaque that read, "In memory of those who stood together when it mattered most." Weeks passed and the final traces of the old HOA faded like a bad dream. Without fines hanging over their heads, residents started painting their houses in bright, cheerful colors. Gardens flourished. Block parties became a regular thing. One evening, while sitting on my porch with a cold drink in hand and the smell of fresh-cut grass in the air, Jenna stopped by. She sat on the top step looking out over the street. "You ever think about running for city council?" she asked, tossing me a sideways look. I chuckled. "After the circus? I think I'll stick to motorcycles and fixing sprinklers." "I'm serious," she said, nudging my boot with her shoe. "You're good at rallying people. You don't back down." I thought about it. About how far we had come. About how easy it would have been to give up, to let people like Teresa and Victor steamroll us into silence. Maybe that was the real victory, not just reclaiming our neighborhood, but realizing just how much power ordinary people had when they stood together. "I'll think about it," I said. She smiled and raised her bottle. "To Willow Creek." I clinked mine against hers. "To Willow Creek," I echoed. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the street, I leaned back in my chair and listened to the sound of kids laughing in the distance, the hum of sprinklers ticking on, and the quiet, steady heartbeat of a neighborhood that had finally found its voice. And somewhere, deep in the back of my mind, I knew no matter what came next, we were ready.